What if Anakin Skywalker fell on Yavin 4?
Your senses betray you, as you betrayed me.
After all that's happened, still you live.
To have fallen so far and learned nothing, that is your failing.
The failure is yours. No longer do your whispers crawl within my skull. No longer do I suffer beneath teachings that weaken us. The Jedi Order is finished. I did what with all your power you could not do. They are all dead.
What would happen if the Padawan to Obi-Wan Kenobi fell to the dark side at the start of the Clone Wars? What if he fully gave in to his anger and hate? And what now? Episode 2. Scorched and burning, inflamed and heated, throbbing and parched was the newest Dark Lord amongst the Sith, wasting not a moment to board and barge upon the very same ship he previously parked upon the dunes of Korriban, a planet and place that drove most mad and others straight to death. Only the fewest amongst galactic history came here with purpose. First, the Dark Lords, led by Ajunta Paul, followed by countless others, all led by the dark, all funneled towards the desire for power, yet none knowing what or who would come after them. The very same thought that failed to even form inside the newly trained mind of Darth Krayt, once Anakin Skywalker, but now no longer. With his previous victory over Asajj Ventress upon Yavin 4, following his 6-month absence from the Galactic War, his return would be roughly placed here, nearly right after the beginning of the Cestus Deception and the Confederate Shadowfeed Dispatch, or at the very least, the 14412 Galactic Resynchronization Edition. An edition that elaborates on the escape of Wat Tambor after the events of Mandalore, pre-planned and proposed by Darth Sidious, something that also would now occur in our timeline, with the exception of a new Dark Lord. From here, I can't progress any further in our story without explaining in detail the actions from both missions of Mandalore. And yes, I do mean both of them, simply because of how convoluted George's timeline is specifically for Wat Tambor. What I mean is, there are 2 missions to Mandalore. The mission to Mandalore, as commissioned by Anakin Skywalker, but also the mission to Mandalore performed by Bail Organa. Out of these 2, only Anakin's mission, his ability to single-handedly slay 2 Dark Jedi at once, and his confrontation with Dooku are given a precise date, going on to arrest Wat Tambor before he is later broken free in the Shadowfeed edition that I previously mentioned earlier. If we factor in the Bailed Out comic, also previously mentioned, the highlight of this focus should be this question: who went to Mandalore first? It couldn't have been Anakin, because when he originally left Mandalore, he arrested Tambor, which means Bail had to visit first, unless you, the person listening to this, believe that the Bailed Out comic took place during 20 or even 19 BBY, which I disagree with. I personally maintain the belief that both missions are progressing at the same time in universe, with Anakin's arrival on Mandalore being the Jedi escort that Bail's pilot was mockingly pleading for. Of course, this is just my assumption, but I refuse to believe this comic takes place later than 21 BBY. And the only reason I'm recapping all of this right now is because Anakin Skywalker in our timeline no longer exists to do that mission, meaning that during the very return of Darth Krayt, Tambor wouldn't just be free, he never would have gone to prison in the first place. Even if we hold on to the assumption that Tachi herself would be sent on the very same mission, having to slay and defeat Vinok and Karok, just as Anakin did, as well as defeating Count Dooku's force projection in the very same manner. The presumptive capture of Wat Tambor would always still end in the exact same result as it did during George's timeline, with Darth Sidious organizing his escape. That's why here, in our story, instead of changing his escape or capture, we're going to change what Tambor would do afterwards. Still returning to his private home on the near robotic city planet of Foundry, his next plan would be retaliation towards those he perceived as his enemy. Let's say that his spies in the Senate have also returned to him, that the budding friendship between Tachi and Padme Amidala has tripled since Anakin's departure. Feeding off of this pivotal plot point, let's go even further and say that Padme confessed her marriage to Anakin during this plight. And while Siri would keep this information to herself, telling not even the Jedi Master always beside her when she needed him, the time she spent with Padme was evidence enough for Wat Tambor's spies to continuously gawk and glare. Knowing well that his chances of bringing harm to Tachi, a Jedi Master, was next to nothing, he instead would operate with a different approach, to slay the woman he now instead perceived as Siri's best friend. Because of this, because of Padme's trauma, and the war itself grinding further and farther, with each week feeling like an entire year, Palpatine soon would even suggest she return to Naboo for a week of vacation, revealing his own knowledge about the marriage Padme held with Anakin, as well as the fear he felt for the Jedi boy regarded as his son, pressing the luck and sympathy always easily won by his outwardly frail appearance. Continuing off of this plot point, her return to the island where she married Anakin would obviously be made apparent to Wat Tambor. What wouldn't be known is the placement of Darth Krayt and his own arrival, burning straight across the outer rim and then barreling through the mid-rim until the single point of his destined desire was found, lush and lavish, green and serene, pure and perfect, just as his memory told him it would be. And while this level of perfection would narrowly numb the pressing path of the dark side that constantly coursed through him, its presence was instantly magnified by the arrival of Wat Tambor and a Confederate fleet leaving hyperspace. Signaled first by a red alert amongst the interior of his own vessel, yet swiftly trailed by a mirage of blaster fire as cannons came fast, directed not at him or the ship he commanded, but the defenseless planet beyond him. What would follow would be the second invasion of Naboo, essentially the second battle of Naboo, but this time fought during the Clone Wars. At least, that's what would have happened if Darth Krayt didn't steer and swerve his vessel into the hangar bay of Tambor's capital ship. Safe from being shot or harmed, since his own ship he flew was previously owned and authorized by Asajj Ventress, docking came like second nature. Easier still was his next act, to rise from his chair and descend the stairs before becoming shrouded by those that greeted him. Droids and drones, units and deployments seeking answers and orders, all under the assumption that he himself was their commander, cloaked and covered not just by the tattered cloth he still wore from his days as a Padawan, but the dark side masking him. And that's why his reply came accompanied by twin pupils of yellow and a smiling grin, happy to exclaim and proclaim that he now was their general, and that he also acted under the highest of Confederate authority. And yes, normally, I'm sure such a command wouldn't openly work, holding on to the idea that a spoken number or a passphrase would be needed to program the droids. However, let's say that Anakin's uses of Ventress's ship allows him to skip over all of that. In fact, let's take that even further. Let's say that Darth Sidious purposely ordered the droids to obey such an outcome, planning for Anakin's return. Having felt the same previous shift through the Force as the Jedi did, yet making his own preparations for such an outcome. This means that while Palpatine wouldn't know when or where Darth Krayt would return, once he did, and he arrived in Ventress's ship, his resulting welcome from the droids that greeted him would be one accustomed for Confederate generals. A surprise to be sure, but a fully welcomed one by everyone except the previously existing officer, Wat Tambor, promptly skewered and beheaded when Darth Krayt finally reached the bridge, soon ordering the ships around him to obey and oblige his every command. From here, the concept of Darth Krayt ordering his newly owned fleet to encircle and engulf Naboo for protection does come to mind, and it's going to happen in our timeline, because I personally can't find any evidence of a permanent clone legion being stationed near or at Naboo. And to the best of my knowledge, there's only 5 named legions, with the rest either being battalions, companies, or divisions. And even then, in George's original timeline, Anakin wasn't given command of the 501st until the same night he marched on the Jedi Temple as Darth Vader. We actually know so little about the 501st in George's original timeline that Commander Oppo himself is only relevant in 2 novels, The Revenge of the Sith movie and 1 comic. Other than that, the 501st Legion is honestly much more important later on, during the Fell Empire and the reign of Anakin Skywalker's great-great-grandson, Emperor Rowan Fell. Of course, that is a story for a different time and episode, as right now, our direct ire must be pivoted towards the descent of Darth Krayt onto the surface of Naboo, frightening many at first when they saw the size of his droid army, and dread spread further with the absence of clones. Only the familiar pattern of someone they thought they knew was enough to instill peace amongst the citizens of Theed City, soothed by the vessel soaring overhead that no one knew, but all were aware of its destined placement, because only one person would be heading towards the lake below with such speed. The Jedi Padawan and student that so many on Naboo had grown accustomed to. Anakin Skywalker, the name was thought aloud as roaring turbines blasted just enough pressure to finally bridge the cliffside gap long since beyond his reach, all as this newly christened Lord of Sith finally felt the emotion he long thought lost. Love. The love that felt gone with every single second he wasted. Surging to land, the very same ship made his, so too was the woman that breached and bridged the stone corridors to greet him, his woman, his lover, and his wife. I should explain here that the dark side itself does not prevent someone from loving, and in reality, the dark side would only make them love more, because love is fed by passion, and through passion they would gain power. Only then would their chains be broken. Comparisons could be made to Darth Malgus and how he slaughtered his own Twi'lek lover after claiming she made him soft and weak. But even then, that was only after the literal sacking of Coruscant, and with himself being fully drowned in the dark side. With no Obi-Wan there to interrupt, with his own droid fleet in orbit guarding the planet, and with his wife right where he knew her to be, everything felt perfect as they ran towards the other, passing fountains of stone and walkways encompassed by grass. And while, yes, Darth Krayt, or as Padme would still openly call him, Anakin, would indeed be fueled and fused to the dark side, yellow eyes are only really prevalent when the user themselves are enjoying the sick and twisted acts they commit with the dark side. Because of this, in this specific moment, the only concerning sight for his wife to see would be the dried layers of dust caked around his collarbone, the unwashed layers of month-old blood from his hair, and his robotic limb caked and clogged by so much sand that fingers would barely budge. Yet none of that mattered to either her or the husbands he thought lost for so long, embracing and interlocking themselves against the other, promptly tripping one another by mistake before plummeting into the nearest fountain. And as these war-torn partners shot to silence the longing in their hearts, we're finally halfway through the monstrosity of a book, the Cestus Deception. For context, Anakin Skywalker is not present during the original Cestus Deception, something that is never fully explained, just brushed off. But with this premise holding true in our timeline, that means Anakin's absence from the Cestus Deception won't be noticed at all, because he was never there to begin with. More than that, this is a perfect introduction into the Battle of Kartau, a skirmish that I normally rush over in other videos, but for this story, it'll be pivotal, just as it was in George's timeline. What I mean is, the clone cylinders won here are the very same cylinders that Grand Admiral Thrawn would go on to discover at Wayland exactly 30 years later. Our next change will be this battle, and the idea that the Elder Sith Spirits are disappointed with Dark Sidious, telling Darth Krayt about his true identity. And the reason why the Sith Spirits of old would choose our Darth Krayt over Darth Sidious would be simple. By slaughtering his master in uneven and unfair combat, Sidious had automatically forfeited his right to the title of Sith. The same argument could even be made for Darth Plagueis himself, who also deceptively struck his master down from the back. Both of these were far cries and barely even shadows compared to Darth Zana and her open confrontation against her own master. There and then, she proved that she and she alone was worthy of the title. Such ideas of honor and pride were long since lost and abandoned before Darth Sidious even took up the mantle, and arguably the last living Sith who genuinely deserved the title was Darth Tenebrous, partially because Darth Tenebrous wasn't a backstabbing coward, but also because we don't technically know how his master died, or even the real name of his master. All we do know is that his master was a Twi'lek, and he died sometime before 100 BBY. Some Sith are difficult to talk about, especially when they themselves are only ever mentioned in one singular short story and one novel. However, the point is, the Elden Sith spirits of old, like Darth Zozane and Ludau Kresh, would encourage war not just against the Jedi, but Darth Sidious as well, waging words and accusation that not just one, but both were responsible for the torment and torture that spread every day across the galaxy. The Darth Krayt in our timeline would come to the very same conclusion that the original one did. No more. No more Republic. No more Confederacy. No more empires. No more Council. No more Rule of Two. Because there could only be one. One Sith one Lord, one power in the galaxy, one light against the chaos that surrounded it. But all of this would have to wait until a later day and date, because right now, the same man who was a Dark Lord was also a husband, and the only battle crossing his mind right now was the one he fought against his wife, both still embracing the other in the fountain they filled.